You already understand that fire spreads, that some materials burn longer than others, and that water usually puts flames out. These are simple observations, but at certain points in history, humans learned that these rules could be manipulated. Fire could be made to stick. It could be made to spread on impact. In some cases, it could even be made worse by water. What this tells you is that long before formal chemistry, humans were already engineering controlled reactions for destruction. The obvious explanation is that early warfare relied on brute force, stones, blades, and physical strength. Fire might appear secondary, just a tool for burning structures, but the evidence does not support that simplification. Across multiple regions and time periods, humans were not just using fire. They were designing systems that altered how fire behaved. This suggests a more precise question. Not when did humans use fire in war, but when did they begin to control its properties in predictable, repeatable ways? The evidence begins with materials. In regions such as Mesopotamia and the Caucasus, naturally occurring naphtha and bitumen seeped from the ground. These substances are chemically similar to crude oil. They are viscous, adhesive, and highly flammable. Archaeological and textual records indicate that these materials were collected and transported deliberately. This means they were not incidental fuels. They were selected for specific properties. What this tells you is that early humans recognized that some fuels behave differently from others. Sulfur provides a second component. It is found near volcanic regions and appears as a yellow mineral. When burned, sulfur produces a distinctive blue flame and releases sulfur dioxide gas. This gas is toxic. It irritates the eyes and lungs and can cause rapid suffocation in enclosed spaces. Evidence of sulfur use appears in both military texts and archaeological contexts, often in combination with other materials. This suggests intentional pairing. Sulfur was not just burned, it was used to modify the effects of fire. A third material, quicklime, introduces a more complex mechanism. Quicklime is produced by heating limestone to high temperatures, driving off carbon dioxide and leaving calcium oxide. This substance reacts violently with water in an exothermic reaction, releasing significant heat. Experimental reconstructions show temperatures can exceed 300 degrees Celsius during hydration. This means that a dry mixture containing quicklime could generate heat on contact with moisture. What this tells you is that early humans were not only selecting fuels, but also incorporating reactive components that changed behavior under specific conditions. These materials converge in the design of early incendiary devices. The most common form is the clay fire pot. Archaeological findings and historical descriptions show that earthenware vessels were filled with mixtures of pitch, resin, naphtha, and sulfur. A cloth wick, soaked in oil, was inserted at the opening. This created a delayed ignition system. The pot could be lit, transported, and then thrown. When the vessel shattered on impact, the contents dispersed across a surface while still burning. The mechanism is straightforward but effective. The clay container serves as both storage and delivery system. The fuel mixture ensures sustained combustion. The adhesive properties of bitumen and resin cause the burning material to cling to surfaces. This is critical. A non-adhesive fuel would simply burn in place. A sticky fuel transfers fire to structures, equipment, and individuals. What this tells you is that the goal was not just ignition, but persistence and spread. Launch methods further amplify this effect. Fire pots were thrown by hand, but also by catapults and large crossbows. This allowed them to clear defensive walls and reach interior spaces. The physics is simple. A sealed container preserves the fuel during flight. Impact breaks the container, maximizing surface area and oxygen exposure. This increases combustion intensity at the moment of contact. The result is a controlled burst of spreading fire. Siege warfare provides the clearest context for these developments. Stone walls are resistant to direct assault. They are not easily broken without prolonged effort. But the interior of a fortress contains vulnerable elements: wooden structures, storage areas, and personnel. Fire introduces a second front. If defenders must divert attention to extinguish flames, they reduce their capacity to repel attackers. This creates a temporary imbalance. What this tells you is that incendiary weapons were not only destructive, but strategic. The concept of boiling oil appears frequently in later depictions, but the material evidence suggests a different reality. Oil, especially olive oil, was valuable and not typically used in large quantities for defense. Instead, defenders used substances such as heated pitch, resin, or even sand. Superheated sand is particularly effective. It flows easily and can penetrate gaps in armor. Once inside, it transfers heat directly to the skin. This bypasses external protection. What this tells you is that defenders were applying the same principle, modifying materials to maximize thermal damage. At a more advanced level, these ideas culminate in what is known as Greek fire. Developed in the Byzantine Empire in the 7th century CE, it represents a significant step in controlled chemical warfare. The exact composition is unknown, but historical descriptions indicate a mixture likely containing petroleum derivatives, sulfur, and possibly quicklime. The defining feature is its behavior. It could burn on water and resist extinguishing attempts with water. This behavior suggests a combination of hydrophobic fuel and reactive components. If water spreads the fuel or triggers additional heat release, attempts to extinguish the fire would fail, or even intensify it. Reports indicate that Greek fire could only be effectively suppressed with sand, vinegar, or other smothering agents. What this tells you is that the system was designed to exploit the expected response of the enemy. Delivery systems for Greek fire were also more complex. Byzantine ships were equipped with siphon mechanisms mounted at the bow. These systems used pressure, likely generated by pumps and heated reservoirs, to project a stream of burning liquid onto enemy vessels. This is functionally similar to a flamethrower. The engineering required includes sealed containers, pressure control, and heat management. This suggests a coordinated integration of chemistry and mechanics. The secrecy surrounding Greek fire reinforces its significance. Historical records indicate that the formula was tightly controlled, and attempts to disclose it were treated as acts of treason. When the Byzantine Empire declined, the exact composition was lost. This implies that the knowledge was not widely distributed or easily reproducible. What this tells you is that early chemical technologies could be both powerful and fragile, dependent on controlled transmission. Additional evidence from archaeological sites shows parallel developments. At Dura Europos in 256 CE, remains of a tunnel conflict reveal the use of sulfur and bitumen to produce toxic smoke. Persian forces appear to have ignited a mixture at the entrance of a tunnel and used bellows to direct the fumes toward Roman soldiers. The confined space amplified the effect. 19 Roman bodies were found in positions consistent with rapid suffocation. This is one of the earliest physical examples of a gas-based weapon. In China during the Song dynasty, early forms of gunpowder were adapted for chemical effects rather than explosive force. Mixtures containing arsenic and plant toxins were packed into containers and ignited or dispersed. The goal was not immediate destruction, but incapacitation. The resulting smoke caused disorientation, vomiting, and temporary blindness. This suggests an understanding that combustion can be used to deliver chemical agents into the air. Denier naval warfare provides another example. During the siege of Tyre in 332 BCE, defenders used a fire ship loaded with combustible materials, including sulfur and bitumen. The ship was ignited and directed toward siege equipment constructed by Alexander the Great's forces. The collision transferred fire to the wooden structures, destroying them rapidly. This demonstrates the same principle at a larger scale, combining fuel, delivery, and timing to maximize impact. Across these cases, a consistent pattern emerges. Humans identified materials with specific properties. They combined those materials to produce predictable effects. They designed containers and delivery systems to control when and where those effects occurred. This is a functional definition of applied chemistry, even if the underlying reactions were not formally understood. The constraint is that these systems were not precise by modern standards. Mixtures varied. Environmental conditions affected performance. Moisture, temperature, and storage all introduced variability. There was also risk to the user. Reactive materials such as quicklime or volatile fuels could ignite prematurely. This means that early incendiary weapons required both knowledge and caution. They were effective, but not fully controlled. There is also variation in adoption. Not all societies used these methods extensively. Access to materials played a role. Regions without natural petroleum sources had to rely on alternative fuels. Technical knowledge also influenced usage. Some methods, like Greek fire, required specialized equipment and training. This limited their spread. What this tells you is that technological advantage in this domain was uneven and context-dependent. The broader implication is that the development of these weapons did not require modern scientific theory. It required observation, experimentation, and transmission of practical knowledge. Humans noticed that certain substances burned differently, that some reactions produced heat or gas, and that combining materials changed outcomes. Over time, these observations were refined into repeatable techniques. This answers the original question. Ancient humans did not invent bombs in the modern sense of high explosives. Instead, they engineered containers and mixtures that controlled combustion and chemical reactions to produce targeted effects. The key innovation was not the materials themselves, but the way they were combined and deployed. What this tells you is that the boundary between simple fire use and chemical engineering is gradual. The same reasoning you use when choosing a fuel or predicting how something burns has deep historical roots. Early incendiary weapons are an extension of that reasoning, applied under pressure and refined through conflict. In modern terms, you still rely on these principles. You understand that some substances spread fire, that others suppress it, and that reactions can be triggered by contact with water or air. The difference is that you now have formal explanations. Ancient humans had only observation and iteration, but the underlying logic was the same.